son.
Yeah, it's the real deal.
It is the real deal.
Humans of Iowa State 7, Mark.
So at the start of every one of these interviews, I just have the person I'm interviewing introduce yourself. So feel free to go ahead and do that.
I'm Missy Springsteen-Haupt, and I'm an assistant teaching professor of language, literacy, and culture in the School of Education here at Iowa State University.
Awesome. As I mentioned in our email and a little bit before this, it's going to start with just one prompt, and that is, tell me your story. So go ahead.
At first, when I saw you were doing this project, I was like, what story do I tell? Because I feel like there's so many different stories that are my story, and they weave in and out of each other. So I'll try to keep it with a focus. I grew up in kind of non-traditional family environment. My biological father left when I was an infant, and my mom, my sister, and I lived with my grandparents for a while. And then when I was a toddler, my mom met my stepdad, who would end up being my dad. He was a self-described, self-employed starving artist who also battled a dual diagnosis addiction. And so a mental health diagnosis alongside alcoholism, which spread into other forms of addiction. And so I had this childhood that was full of highs and lows, and also very unique in a lot of ways. And one of the places that I always felt super valued was at school, at my elementary school, Kenwood Elementary School in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to be exact, because I like to give a shout out to public schools. And that was a place where being a reader and a writer and someone who liked to talk a lot were all, praised by my teachers, because those are skills they look for in students. And I knew from the time I was in third grade that I wanted to be a teacher, because what could be cooler than being in charge of everyone and reading out loud to people and, all of that other stuff. I maintained that. No matter how bad school got for me, I always still wanted to be a teacher. And so even though it started out from a place of good, by middle school, things had changed. When I was in sixth grade, my biological father was finally found, in the sense that he had been hiding from child support for a long time, and my mom finally found him. And so once he was paying child support again, he decided that he wanted to see us. He lived in North Carolina, so that didn't really shake out as living in Iowa. But I did go to visit him and at least get to know him a little better. But it created a lot of, complicated feelings in my life. And middle school is a time when you have a lot of complicated feelings anyway. And I distinctly remember in seventh grade, my social studies teacher made us do a family tree project. We had to make our family tree, which sounds pretty innocuous on the outside, a pretty common thing. But for me, the reality was, my step family was my family. My dad was my dad, and my biological family were just kind of like acquaintances, if that even. And I remember saving up all my nerve for the end of class to ask him, I know it's not bloodline correct to do a family tree with step family. I understand that from a logical student perspective. But number one, I don't really have a way to find out the information about my biological father's side of the family, because we're just flat out not that close or in contact. And number two, it would be painful. I'd rather honor my dad in this way. And my teacher immediately shot it down and said, that doesn't count, it's not your family. And that was like a turning point moment in my life, that adults in school weren't just there to nurture and support. There could be ones there who break your heart too. And I, like any 13-year-old with a healthy bit of like rage inside, I flat out stopped doing everything for his class. I went from an A student who was in ELP, the Gifted and Talented program, to getting D's and F's, and my teachers having meetings about how no one doubted my intellectual capabilities. It was an attitude problem, like a very clear attitude problem. And I carried that in, through 8th grade too. And luckily I still had some teachers who didn't give up on me and, gave myself a fresh start in high school, but it still really stuck with me that just because someone wants to be a teacher or is a teacher, does not mean that they are incapable of harming kids just due to what their life experiences were. And if it was as simple as that family tree assignment for someone with a blended family, then it had to be a lot worse, like for other more clear things, I don't know what that teacher would have said to me if he had known that sometimes when my dad, fell off the wagon, he would drink Listerine to get drunk instead of, if those things were going on, would he have thought less of me? So when I introduce myself to my students here at Iowa State, I say, I'm motivated as a teacher by passion and loving and thinking it's the best job in the world. And I'm also super motivated by revenge against the teachers who maybe, didn't appreciate or outright dismissed who I was as a person. Yeah. I think when I was deciding to become a teacher, I knew reading and writing, I wanted to be English, and I became a middle school English teacher for the first 15 years of my career because that's when I really needed someone the most. Yeah. And I went into it thinking I'm gonna be different. I'm gonna be cool. I'm gonna, respect kids. And then, as soon as you get into it, I really saw the side of myself that I hated and the ways in which I kind of became complicit in the same things I hated about the system. Yeah. And so I feel like I've lived both of those sides.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. Will you touch on your journey to coming to Iowa State for me?
Yes, I would love to. And coincidentally or not, that goes back to my dad too. Wow. In 2016, I was a veteran teacher at that point in time. I had won some local awards. I was feeling, I was through the rough early years of teaching where I feel like I need to apologize to every student I ever let down, and was getting a little better. And my dad was found dead in the yard of my childhood home, and his addiction had been getting worse for the past few years. It was to a point where, I wasn't speaking to him anymore because the ups and downs of addiction are very hard as a family member. And it wrecked me because in one way, I could have told you that was how my dad's life would end, since the time I was a child, just seeing the struggle with what addiction looks like in all of its forms. And in another way, it was just completely unprepared for the devastating impact that it would have to lose this person who, because he couldn't always hold a job down when I was a kid, he was my primary caregiver in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I've had this moment at school a few months later, sitting in the stereotypical teacher's lounge, people are, talking, whatever. And some of my colleagues are talking about a bad family. It's easy to make blanket statements about good and bad families when you're in education. And it's for the first time I had this whiplash moment of like, oh, if I had gone to school here, they would be talking badly about me and my family. And then, holy crap, what am I doing here? You know, like, how am I, like, am I the bad guy? Or am I one of the bad guys? Because as much as I tried to make my classroom a space that, you know, I don't think we can ever promise safe spaces, but promising like a space where you're at least heard and cared for has always been my goal. And then just realizing, but if as soon as I turn out of that room, am I complicit in the harm of a system that like puts labels on kids because of like their identity or their family's identity, or, you know, in the case of small town Iowa, even reputation, you know, and just those social dynamics. And as I stewed in that the next couple of years, I got angrier and angrier,
Sure.
just because I was forced to think about my own complicity in harmful systems, you know, and it doesn't take me labeling families as good or bad, though I'm sure at some point, like, I've certainly been part of that. But it hit that moment of critical consciousness in my own identity that, like, I don't know if I can continue to work at a place where I would not have felt comfortable as a student, or I would not have felt valued as a student. And I did, you know, what I refer to as like the nerdiest revenge mission ever. And I submitted my resignation and applied to get a doctorate in ed policy at Iowa State University. Because I decided that, like, I understood how to be a compassionate teacher. I understood how to teach kids, like, how to use writing to express themselves and share their voice. But I did not know anything about the ways laws and policies impact what we do in schools, and the harm that sometimes comes with that, or what policies also are put in place to try to prevent harm. And so I still felt very committed to, like, I want to work in education, but I have to understand the outside of the classroom stuff before I can actually see change or know where I fit into teaching anymore. And so I came here as a student, and then I joke, I just didn't leave. Like, I was working on my EDD, and then the opportunity came up to be a term faculty member in the School of Education, teaching foundations courses, teaching courses and like how to help teachers build relationships with students and all that stuff. And it felt like you know, like, everything's coming up, Missy. Like, this is perfect for me, and I'm gonna apply for it, and I got it. And so, you know, I made that transition from EDD student into term faculty member.
Wow, that's a big jump too.
Yeah,
Congratulations, by the way.
It was very stressful. Yeah, my first year of teaching here was also my dissertation year. So I was writing a 250-page dissertation while trying to learn what it meant to be faculty as opposed to a middle school teacher.
Wow, and grade papers and all.
Yeah.
Holy cow, you must have been busy.
Yes, and very in need of intense therapy, wasn't it?
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. So you mentioned that the reason why you ultimately decided to leave middle school teaching was because you couldn't be complicit with a system that treats children in a way you don't agree with. Mm-hmm. Okay. When you came to Iowa State and saw DEI rollbacks and changing of names and different courses and offices being erased on campus, how does that make you feel to now work for a system that is doing something similar?
Yeah, you know, I've thought about it a lot in the past few, because when I left middle school teaching, it was, you know, 2019, and so it was very different, but also very similar. And formal policies weren't near what they have been in the past few years. And so I kind of wonder with myself, why am I not angrier right now? I was so angry last time that I was willing to quit my job. And then this time around, like, the last thing I am thinking is to quit my job. And I think the understanding of policy and how it works in education is part of that. I'm really thankful to past Missy for being like, hey, maybe we should, learn a little bit more about laws, because I can see how much state level policy, federal level policy is introduced based on partisan beliefs and not actually what's best for students or kids. And I can also see how it, the focus on education reform is not anything new. It's an ongoing tension since as long as public schools have existed. But I also really realized that someone with my understanding of the system, both as being a teacher who works in it, a researcher who studies it, and a student who was once in it, I think there are a lot of lenses that I bring to understand what's happening right now. And so it makes me feel like maybe people with that level of understanding are more important in the system than ever, even if names are being changed and departments are closing. As a former English teacher, I think a lot about the power of words. Words are very powerful things, but especially when it comes to policy, words are often a way of organizations saying they're doing something without actually doing it. And if taking away the name of something takes away individuals within the systems like feeling a moral obligation to do what's right, then they probably weren't that committed in the first place. So I think you can disband diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have to in the state of Iowa. It's now the law of the land, not just in Iowa. But I think if, as an educator, your classroom isn't a space for multiple perspectives, aka diversity of ideas, equity, a fair chance for everyone, and inclusion, a place where everyone feels like they are cared about, like they belong, and like their voice matters. That's a huge issue in your classroom and in your teaching and in your offices, because those basic things, whether they are formally codified in like an office on campus, they still belong in any place where learning takes place. And the commitment to making sure that your classroom is a space for all students of all backgrounds, and that your campus is a space for all students of all backgrounds, and all faculty, and all everyone, professional and scientific workers, then you've created a real echo chamber type space, and that just flatly goes against the Research One land grant mission of a place like Iowa State University. So I think formalizing titles, name changes, that is about political compliance with policy, and I completely understand that as someone who has dedicated her life to working in systems, but I also know that there's a moral imperative in education that is not easily dismantled.
You mentioned earlier that you felt safe in your elementary school and middle schools because you had gone through some traumatic things as a child, and it just felt like a safe haven. Because of that, do you purposefully try to make your classroom environments feel more like a safe haven for other children? Or students, I should say.
I still think of, I'm still guilty of thinking of my college students as children, which I know I need to break that habit because you're adults and it's disrespectful, but I do to myself think of you as kids. I try within reason. I will say part of the, like what you brought up earlier with talking about, working in systems, even if it's, in tension with your values. Part of that is being an educator is embracing a lot of different contradictions. You know, I know from some students I'm like this evil, like the worst, you know, person they've ever had, whether it's a middle schooler who hated my guts, or whether it's a college student who, you know, wishes I would be fired. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are students who, you know, literally write me a note and say like, you know, you saved my life, or you made my life a better place, or I think you're amazing. And so part of working in that career is understanding that all of those things are true. Like I'm an ogre, and, you know, my classroom might not be safe. And also maybe my classroom is the safest. And the constant work of my career as an educator is like negotiating that balance, you know, looking at my course reviews and like, was I too, you know, where was I too harsh? Where was I too lenient? And what's going to be the balance next semester? And how can I get better? And I'm also consistently, just due to the nature of my job, communicating that to my students in classes, because, you know, they have to learn how much relationships impact whether students feel safe or comfortable. Learning requires discomfort. It does. There is no learning without discomfort, whether that's just a little stretch of discomfort that has a super satisfying like aha moment at the end, or whether it's like, this makes me question everything I know to be true about life, and I don't like that, and I don't want to think about it. That level of discomfort, any subject, any class, any school, any learning is going to require that we negotiate with that discomfort. And so it's why I don't think of, you know, my classroom, as much as I want it to be safe, I don't think of it as being safe, because I can't promise that there won't be that discomfort of like looking at yourself. I try to ease the comfort by using myself as the example first, and like, here's this jerky thing I did as a first year teacher, you know, and, you know, here's how I tried to make it better, and here's what I'm still really bad at, you know, and just showing that as a constant negotiation, and something that you can work on if you are willing to embrace that discomfort of trying to work on it.
Yeah. All right. So you appear to be very happy and very almost at peace with both positive and negative reviews of your teaching and yourself as a person from students. How do you cope with these reviews, whether it be positive or negative? How do you take them in stride and continue to teach?
I think that's like a lifelong effort, and it's something I've had a lot of conversations with on people. You know, I will say, I liked the middle school version of course reviews better, where a kid would just say like, I hate you, you know, and then leave the room, or where a parent would send me an email about what a trash person they thought I was, as opposed to it's the end of semester, congratulations on getting your grades in. Here's a lot of students listing everything they think is wrong about you or right about you. And it is something that I've had to negotiate, something I try to be very honest about. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I actually participated in a study here on campus through the wellness lab, and it changed my life to have to have this very structured process to go through, where like, I would overly focus on the negative ones, obviously, of like, okay, all of these ones that are complaining about me, those are the ones that are true. The ones who love me, who cares about that, and so finding a way to not put such personal feeling stock into it and be able to mine out what can make me a better teacher is a huge part of that. And then I also tell my students, like, teaching hurts your feelings almost every day. And teachers hurt kids' feelings almost every day. And so there's also that tension of like, it's happening on both ends. And as soon as you can realize that sometimes you're both kind of the bad guy and the good guy, I think that makes it a lot easier for me to see, okay, if I was the bad guy last week because I was hungry before, my 3:30 class, and that's an easily fixable thing. If I was the bad guy because I said something like really hurtful to a student, then as the adult, I need to fix it,
Yeah.
Is there any particular moments or people that stuck out that forever changed your perspective on things?
Oh, I think like the reality of the career is that those moments come all the time. And so that like of, I remember I was on a hiring committee once when I was still a middle school teacher of like, who was going to be our new social studies teacher. And we had interviewed a couple, and to me there was one candidate that was so clearly the right choice. He was smart, he was kind of like, he knew his stuff. And then there was another guy who was like, there was nothing wrong with him, but he was just like, just too nice. And like, that sounds like such a ridiculous thing to say, but his response to questions in the interview was always, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I'm like, and I'm like, okay, that's not what I want in a colleague. I want a colleague who challenges me. I want a colleague who makes me better, like I want that kind of iron sharpening iron. And I just remember sitting in that interview committee and I raised my voice against my other two people and I'm like, oh, but this guy's such a nice guy. And I put my hands on the desk and I was so dramatic. I said, we don't need another nice guy. And I think that was the beginning of kind of my sense of like justice, of like, there's a difference between being nice and being kind. There's a difference between, this like Midwestern level of like niceness and kind of collegiality and what's actually good. And so I think oftentimes in education, it's really easy to put on like the fake nice front. Whereas I'd rather have, someone in all their ugly glory that is empathetic and, deeply invested in how hard the work is rather than simply nice. I've also had like a million students who have done like the funniest things ever that stick out in my head as just like, I feel so honored that I was able to work with middle school kids for so long and just like read their weird writings. I gave them free write Fridays where they could write whatever they wanted, and I got some like just bonkers stuff and also some really brilliant stuff. That's the thing I miss the most about middle school, but I'll go sub over at Ames Middle School for a couple hours as my schedule allows and feel very happy about my life decisions once I'm back here. I think also the nature of the courses I teach in the School of Education. I teach, this semester I have a 200, a 300, and a 400 level class. So I have some students in my 400 that I had back when they were 200 level students. I have a student right now in one of my classes who's taken 5 different courses with me during her time at Iowa State. And to me, that is awesome because it's like, okay, I saw them when they were fresh out of college and fresh out of high school and had some strong opinions about things. And now I'm seeing them as seniors and their opinions are different and nuanced. And you can see that growth and that change. And I love it because my role allows me to still feel like a teacher because there is a really big difference between the role of teacher and the role of professor, I think. And I'm glad that in the School of Education, I'm allowed to still be a teacher.
Oh, good. These last 2 questions are questions that I ask everybody, and it's just interesting to see how people respond based on their history and how they believe in things. So, Do you feel welcome at Iowa State?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. Because I spanned that student into faculty role, I would say the first year I was here as a faculty member, in that where I was still a student, I didn't feel welcome just because I felt that my role was such a weird space of being both student and professor new to it. I also, as someone whose experience is solidly up until the past few years in K-12, I'm a respected educator in the K-12 world, and I'm not sure what I am in the university world yet, other than I think my colleagues for the most part enjoy working with me. I feel like it's a hard transition, especially for term faculty, to come in at a research institution because research is the focus, and teaching as a profession in general is often dismissed or a place, obviously, for a lot of public criticism. And so I'm not sure as a teacher I ever feel fully welcome in an organization, because even though the systems don't work without us, we're also the ones who often take the blame in systems. And I'm not sure that I've seen yet a way to make that feel completely welcome.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, I have one last and final question for you, and you don't have to respond to it if you don't have anything for it.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we forgot? Anything that you might want to mention that we haven't said yet? Anything else our readers, viewers, watchers, readers, all of that need to know about?
I just, I've dedicated my whole life to trying to make schools better for kids, whether it's through my classroom or through studying organizations or now through preparing future teachers. And I do consider kids to be that spectrum from preschool through undergrad, that you can tell a lot about society based on how it treats kids and how it treats the people who work with kids. And it is so easy in times when policy makes educators' jobs harder, or in some cases eliminates their jobs, or vastly changes the work we're asked to do. I think the imperative is still that we have to have people who care about kids first, working with kids. We have to do what we can to make classrooms, organizations as humane as possible. And that's not always easy. And it involves a lot of different moral, personal negotiations. And that's hard stuff to do. And the hardest part of my job, I tell my students at Iowa State, is I can't tell you to just be good to kids and then you're gonna do it. That's a personal negotiation every day. It's one that I failed at too, and so I think that broadly, universities right now throughout the US could maybe learn a little bit more from K-12 and the focus that we put on relationships with students and supporting students as entire beings, because that's what our college students need too. That's what our organizations need. We are not these, just vehicles for policy. We're spaces where humans are supposed to learn how to human and do right by each other. And I hope that doesn't get lost in whatever political storms education deals with.